can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. I can go anywhere. Friends to know and ways to grow, a reading rainbow. I can be anything. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. A reading rainbow. A reading rainbow. A reading rainbow. A reading rainbow.
It's Rico's Reads. Gather around, boys and girls, with your blankets, your pillows, and your favorite alcoholic beverages, and listen to Uncle Rico read you a story. And now here's your host, Rico DiGiorgio.
That's awesome. Thank you, CJ. I didn't realize I had my fucking mic down. Uncle Rico, I haven't experienced that since the production of Napoleon Dynamite. Awesome. Good job. Oh, damn it. This stupid. I had the fireplace going, but of course it's YouTube is just going to constantly show me ads. So in the midst of the fireplace, you'll see an occasional ad. Sorry, guys. All right. So as usual, I want to wait a couple minutes, see if there's any late stragglers. How's everyone doing today? Good. Kateri's good. Jen is here. Jay's here. Siege is here. And Steffi is here. Good. Everyone got your alcoholic beverage? What's on the menu for all you drinking tonight? Uncle Rico. Cherry Coke and vanilla vodka. Nice. That's what you had last week, if I remember correctly. Or you had, it wasn't vanilla vodka. It was something akin to that. You got me on the Bluetooth speaker. Oh, shit. This is going to be fun. All right. I think I'm ready. So if you remember last week, I did not get to finish the previous chapter. So we're gonna see how well I can do this today. He and Ron took off their jackets and pulled on their long black robes, kind of like that. I'm not wearing it today because it's hot as fuck in Oakland today. Ron's were a bit short for him. You could see his sneakers underneath him. A voice echoed through the air. We will be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes' time. Please leave your luggage on the train. It will be taken to the school separately. Harry's stomach lurched with nerves, and Ron, he saw, looked pale under his freckles. They crammed their pockets with the last of the sweets and joined the crowd thronging the corridor. The train slowed right down and finally stopped. People pushed their way toward the door out on a tiny, dark platform. Harry shivered in the cold night air. Then a lamp came bobbing over the heads of the students, and Harry heard a familiar voice. First years over here. All right there, Harry. Hagrid's big, hairy face, I'm glad it was his face, beamed over the sea of heads. Come on, follow me. And if any more first years, mind your step now. First years, follow me. Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was so dark on either side of them that Harry thought there must be thick trees there. Nobody spoke much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffed once or twice. You get your first sight of Hogwarts in a second, Hagrid called over his shoulder. Just round this bend here. There was a loud ooh and an occasional ah. The narrow path had opened suddenly into the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. Turrets! Jesus! I'm the one who has the Tourette's. Yes, Fuckwarts. A little Freudian slip right there. How great would it be if like it did have like Tourette's, like just periodically the castle would just yell "fuck" at you. No more photo about, Hagrid called, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting in the water by shore. Harry and Ron were allowed. Were I swear I've only had this much beer and I'm already fucking up. Harry and Ron were followed into their boat by Neville and Hermione. Everyone in, shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. Right then, forward! And the fleet of little boats moved off all at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer to the cliff on which it stood. Heads down, yelled Hagrid, as the first boats reached the cliff. They all bent their heads, and the little boats carried them through a curtain of ivy that hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel, which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle, until they reached a kind of underground harbor, where they clambered out onto rocks and pebbles. Oi, you there! Is this your Toad? Said Hagrid, who was checking the boats as people climbed out of them. Trevor! Cried Neville blissfully, holding out his hands. And no one has ever blissfully said Trevor with their hands out, except for Neville. Then they clambered up a passageway in the rock after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto smooth, damp grass right in the shadow of the castle. They walked up a flight of stone steps and crowded around the huge oak front door. Everyone here. You there. Still got your Toad? Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. End of chapter 6. Wow, I did that in like record time. Chapter 7. The Sorting Hat. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. First here's Professor McGonagall, said Hagrid. I gotta dig deep to my Mrs. Doubtfire. Thank you, Hagrid. Sounds too nice. I will take them from here. She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you could have fit the whole of the Dursleys' house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagged stone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here. But Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small, empty chamber off the hall. They crowded in, standing rather close together than they would usually have done, peering about nervously. Welcome to Hogwarts, said Professor McGonagall. The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because, while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn your house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. I'm really making her nice. Jesus. The sorting hat ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting. Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Ron's smudged nose. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. I shall return when we are ready for you, said Professor McGonagall. Please wait quietly. I'm trying to make it more wretched, Terry. She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. How exactly do they sort us into houses? He asked Ron. Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking. Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test in front of the whole school? But he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would he have to do? He hadn't expected something like this at the moment they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking much except Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all the spells she'd learned and wondering which ones she'd need. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous. Never. Not even when he'd have to take a school report home to the Dursleys saying that he'd somehow turn his teacher's wig blue. I want to know about that. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall would come back and lead him to his doom. Then something happened that made him jump about a foot in the air. Several people behind him screamed. What the? He gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just streamed through the back wall, pearly white and slightly transparent. They glided across the room, talking to one another and hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forgive and forget, I say. We ought to give him a second chance." My dear Friar, haven't we given Peeves all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name, and you know he's not really even a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here? A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. New students, said the fat friar, smiling around at them. About to be salted, I suppose? A few people nodded mutely. Hope to see you in Hufflepuff, said the friar. My old house, you know. Move along now, said a sharp voice. The sorting ceremony's about to start. Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts flowed away through the opposite wall. Now form a line, Professor McGonagall told the first years, and follow me. Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got in a line behind a boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the great hall. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in midair over 4 long tables, where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here so that they came to a halt in a line facing the other students, with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone misty silver. Mainly to avoid all the staring eyes, Harry looked upward and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." It was hard to believe there was a ceiling there at all, and that the great hall didn't simply open onto the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a 4-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. Excuse me. Maybe they had to try and get a rabbit out of it, Harry thought wildly. That seemed the sort of thing. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your ballows black, your top hat sleek and tall. for I am the Hogwarts Sorting Hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the Sorting Hat can't see. So try me on, and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring, nerve, and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've had a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I am a thinking cap. The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables, and then became quite still again. So we've just got to try on the hat, Ron whispered to Harry. Oh, kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll. Troll in the dungeon. Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he did wish they could have tried on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or any of that at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Vomitus. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. She's going to roll a fucking doobie. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be salted. Abbot Hannah, a pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails, stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down. A moment's pause. Hufflepuff! Shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went down and sit at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. Bones, Susan! Hufflepuff! Shouted the hat again, and Susan fucked off to sit next to Hannah. Boot, Terry! Ravenclaw! The table second from the left clapped this time. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Terry as he joined them. Oh, Jesus, I have to figure this one out. Brocklehurst Mandy went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender became the first new Gryffindor, and the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brothers catcalling. Bulstrode Millicent then became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination, after all he'd heard about Slytherin, but he thought they looked like an unpleasant lot. That's great. Harry judging before he knows really just a small amount. You all look like a bunch of racists. He was starting to feel deathly sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during gym at his old school. He'd always been last to be chosen, not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Finch Fletchy Justin, Hufflepuff. Sometimes, Harry noticed, the hat shouted out the house at once, but at others it took a little while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in the line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Granger Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat, looking at, eagerly on her head. Gryffindor! Shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had obviously been a mistake and he'd never get back on the train? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. Of course he fucking did. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When it finally shouted, Gryffindor! Neville ran off, still wearing it. and he had to jog back amid gales of laughter to give it to McDougal Morag. Morag McDougal? God, your parents hated you. Malfoy swaggered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, "Slytherin!" Malfoy went to join his friends Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many people left now. Moon, Knott, Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patel, and then Perks Sally Ann, and then at last, Harry Potter. Potter Harry. As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out, little hissing fires all over the hall. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter? Yes, some of the students are the Monty Python troupe. The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind, either. There's talent. Oh, my goodness, yes. And a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now, that's interesting. So where shall I put you? Harry gripped the edge of the stool and thought, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, eh? Said the small voice. Are you sure? You can be great, you know. It's all in here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness. No doubt about that. No? Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor. Harry heard he heard the hat shout the last word of the whole hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to have been chosen and not put in Slytherin, he hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheer yet. Percy the prefect got up and shook his hand vigorously, while the Weasley twins yelled, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" Sounds like an illness. You might want to go to a clinic for that. Harry sat down opposite the ghost in the rough he had seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry the sudden, horrible feeling he just plunged in a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table properly now. At the end nearest him sat Hagrid, who caught his eye and gave him the thumbs up. Harry grinned back. "What's up, Jess?" And there in the center of the high table, in a large gold chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him at once from the card he'd gotten out of the Chocolate Frog on the train. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole hall that showed as brightly as the ghost's. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, the nervous young man from the Leaky Cauldron. He was looking very peculiar in a large purple turban. That's important shit right there. I always imagined, like, yes, in the movie, it's a big purple turban, but I always kind of way too big. There's previous episodes you can go back on and tuck yourself in to listen to. Potato, roast potatoes, and peppermint humbugs. What the hell's a humbug? I thought that was like a curse word that, like, Scrooge always said. The fuck's a humbug? And why is it peppermint? The Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry, but he'd never been allowed to eat as much as he liked. No, they starved his ass. Like, yeah, they definitely did. Dudley had always taken everything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything except the peppermints and began to eat. It was all delicious. Well, yeah, slave labor is delicious. That does look good, said the ghost in the rough sadly, watching Harry cut up his steak. Can't you? I haven't eaten for nearly 400 years. Trying to make it John Cleese. It's not very good. I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I don't think I've introduced myself. Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, at your service, resident ghost of Gryffindor Tower. I know who you are, said Ron suddenly. My brothers told me about you. You're nearly headless Nick. I would prefer you to call me Sir Nicholas de Mimsy, the ghost began stiffly, but sandy-haired Seamus Finnegan interrupted. Nearly headless? How can you be nearly headless? Sir Nicholas looked extremely miffed, as if their little chat wasn't going at all the way he wanted. Like this, he added irritably. He seized his left ear and pulled. His whole head swung off its neck and fell onto his shoulder as if it was on a hinge. Somebody had obviously tried to behead him, but not done it properly. Looking pleased at the stunned looks on their faces, nearly headless Nick flipped his head back onto his neck, coughed, and said, So, new Gryffindors, I hope you're going to help us win the house championship this year. Gryffindors have never gone so long without winning. Slytherins have got the cup 6 years in a row. The bloody Baron's become almost unbearable. He's the Slytherin ghost. Harry looked over at the Slytherin table and saw a horrible ghost sitting there with blank, staring eyes, a gaunt face, and robes stained with silver blood. How do you know it's silver blood? It's silver. I hope it's blood. I hope it's not something else. His origin is he was bukkake to death. Oh, I'm going to hell. He was right next to Malfoy, who Harry was pleased to see didn't look too pleased with the seating arrangements. How did he get covered in blood? Asked Seamus with great interest. I've never asked, said nearly headless Nick delicately. When everyone had eaten so much as they could, the remains of the food faded from the plates, leaving them sparkling clean as before. A moment later, the desserts appeared. Blocks of ice cream in every flavor you could think of. Apple pies, treacle tarts, chocolate eclairs, and jam donuts. Trifle, strawberries, jello, rice pudding. Just give these kids diabetes the first day. As Harry helped himself to a treacle tart, the talk turned to their families. I'm half and half, said Seamus. Me dad's a muggle. Mom didn't tell him she was a witch till after they were married. Bit of a nasty shock for him. The others laughed. What about you, Neville? Said Ron. Well, my gran brought me up and she's a witch, said Neville. But the family thought I was all muggle for ages. My great-uncle Algie, kept trying to catch me off guard and force some magic out of me. He pushed me off at the end of a Blackpool pier once. I nearly drowned. What the fuck? But nothing happened until I was 8. Great-uncle Algie came. This is not a great-uncle, motherfucker. Came round for dinner, and he was hanging me out of an upstairs window by the ankles when my great-auntie Enid offered him a ring, and he accidentally let go. But I bounced all the way down the garden and into the road. They were all really pleased. Gran was crying. She was so happy. And you should have seen their faces when I got in here. They thought I might not be magic enough to come, you see. Great-uncle Algie was so pleased he bought me my toad. All right, time the fuck out. What the fuck? If he was like a muggle, then Great-uncle Algie was just going to commit child fucking slaughter here. Like, there's got to be an easier way of testing instead of like, hey, if you live, great. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's some Monty Python, like, burn her, she's a witch kind of shit. Stupid. And then you give the fucking kid a toad? Dude, Great-uncle Algie needs to just, like, fuck off. On Harry's other side, Percy Weasley and Hermione were talking about lessons. I do hope they start right away. There's so much to learn. I'm particularly interested in transfiguration. You know, turning something into something else. Of course, it's supposed to be very difficult. You'll be starting small, just matches into needles, that sort of thing. Harry, who was starting to feel warm and sleepy. Me too. Let's add to that. looked up at the high table again. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet. I know that feeling. Professor McGonagall was talking to Professor Dumbledore. Professor Quirrell, in his absurd turban, was talking to a teacher with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and sallow skin. It really should have said Professor Quirrell was trying to talk to a teacher. It happened very suddenly. The hook-nosed teacher looked past Quirrell's turban straight into Harry's eyes, and a sharp, hot pain shot across the scar on Harry's forehead. Ouch! Harry clapped a hand to his head. What is it? Asked Percy. Nothing. The pain had gone as quickly as it had come. Harder to shake off was the feeling Harry had gotten from the teacher's look, a feeling that he didn't like Harry at all. Who's that teacher talking to Professor Quirrell? He asked Percy. Oh, you know Quirrell already, do you? No wonder he's looking so nervous. That's Professor Snape. He teaches potions, but he doesn't want to. Everyone knows he's after Quirrell's job. Knows an awful lot about the dark arts, Snape. Harry watched Snape for a while, but Snape didn't look at him again. At last, the desserts too disappeared, and Professor Dumbledore got to his feet again. The hall fell silent. Just a few more words now that we all fed and watered. I have a few starter term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils, and a few of our older students should do well to remember that as well. Dumbledore's twinkling eyes flashed in the direction of the Weasley twins. I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of the term. Everyone interested in playing for their house team should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. Harry laughed, but he was one of the few who did. He's not serious, he muttered to Percy. Must be, said Percy, frowning at Dumbledore. It's odd, because he usually gives us a reason why we're not allowed to go somewhere. The forest's full of dangerous beasts, everyone knows that. I do think he might have told us prefects, at least. And now, before we go to bed, let us sing the school song, cried Dumbledore. Harry noticed that the other teachers' smiles had become rather fixed. Dumbledore gave his wand a little flick, as if I bet he did. As if he was trying to get a fly off the end, and a long golden ribbon flew out of it, which rose high above the tables and twisted itself, snake-like, into words. Everyone pick their favorite tune, said Dumbledore, and off we go. And the school bellowed. Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy-Warty Hogwarts, teach us something, please. Whether we be old and bald or young with scabby knees, our heads could do with filling with some, I don't know how the fuck they do this. So with some interesting stuff, for now they're barren full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing. Bring back what we forgot. Who wrote this? Oh yeah, I know who wrote this. Bring back what we forgot. Just do your best, we'll do the rest, and learn until our brains all rot. Stanley Kahn and Jimmy Van Heusen are really rolling in their fucking graves right now. Okay, thanks, CJ. Everybody finished the song at different times. At last, only the Weasley twins were left singing along to a very slow funeral march. Dumbledore conducted their last few lines with his wand, and when they had finished, he was one of those who clapped loudest. Music, he said, wiping his eyes. A magic beyond all we do here. And now, bedtime. Off you trot. Off you fuck. The Gryffindor first years followed Percy through the chattering crowds, out to the great hall, and up the marble staircase. Harry's legs were like lead again, but only because he was so tired and full of food. He was too sleepy even to be surprised that the people in the portraits along the corridors whispered and pointed as they passed, or that twice Percy led them through doorways hidden behind sliding panels and hanging tapestries. They climbed more staircases, yawning and dragging their feet, and Harry was just wondering how much fucking further they had to go when they came to a sudden halt. Hashtag Dumbledaddy. Nice. A bundle of walking sticks was floating in midair ahead of them, and as Percy took a step toward them, they started throwing themselves at him. Peeves, Percy whispered to the first years. A poltergeist. He raised his voice. Peeves, show yourself! A loud, rude sound like the air being let out of a balloon answered, which is, do you want me to go to the Bloody Baron? There was a, and a little man with wicked dark eyes and a wide mouth appeared, floating cross-legged in the air, clutching the walking sticks. I will occasionally do my Joker, my Mark Hamill Joker, to kind of supplement this because Joker's voice is almost British, so it's natural to me. But this is definitely going to be Mark Hamill's Joker. Oh, he said with an evil cackle. Ickle firsties, what fun! He swooped suddenly at them. They all ducked. Go away, Peeves, or the Baron will hear about this. I mean it, barked Percy. Peeves stuck out his tongue and vanished, dropping the walking sticks on Neville's head. They heard him zooming away, rattling coats of armor as he passed. You want to watch out for Peeves, said Percy as they set off again. The Bloody Baron's the only one who can control him. He won't even listen to us prefects. Here we are. At the very end of the corridors hung a portrait of a very fat woman in a pink silk dress. Password, she said. Caput Draconis, said Percy, and the portrait swung forward to reveal a round hole in the wall. They all scrambled through it. Neville needed a leg up and found themselves in the Gryffindor common room, a cozy round room full of squashy armchairs. Percy directed the girls through one door to the dormitory and the boys through another. At the top of a spiral staircase, they were obviously in one of the towers. They found their beds at last, 5 four-posters hung with deep red velvet curtains. Their trunks had already been brought up. Too tired to talk much, they pulled on their pajamas and fell into bed. Great food, isn't it? Ron muttered to Harry through their legs. Get off, Scabbers! He's chewing my sheets! That is some deep method shit for when you find out more about Scabbers. He's really playing the part. I feel like the one person who hasn't seen the movies. Harry was going to ask Ron if he'd had any of the treacle tart, but he fell asleep almost at once. Perhaps Harry had eaten a bit too much because he had a very strange dream. He was wearing Professor Quirrell's turban, which kept talking to him, telling him he must transfer to Slytherin at once because it was his destiny. Harry told the turban he didn't want to be in Slytherin. It got heavier and heavier. He tried to pull it off, but it tightened painfully. And there was Malfoy, laughing at him as he struggled with it. Then Malfoy turned into the hook-nosed teacher Snape, whose laugh became high and cold. There was a burst of green light, and Harry woke, sweating and shaking. He rolled over and fell asleep again, and when he woke next day, he didn't remember the dream at all. Damn, that's like a really telling dream. I never actually really thought of it. Chapter 8. The Potions Master. There, look. Where? Next to the tall kid with the red hair, wearing the glasses. Did you see his face? Did you see his scar? Whispers followed Harry from the moment he left his dormitory the next day. People lining up outside classrooms stood on tiptoe to get a look at him, or doubled back to pass him in the corridor again, staring. Harry wished they wouldn't, because he was trying to concentrate on finding his way to classes. There were 100. There were 142 staircases at Hogwarts, Wide, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday. Jesus, those just say, yeah, fuck you. Some with a vanishing step halfway up that you had to remember to jump. Then there were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely or tickle them in exactly the right place. Like, it's a door, it's not a clitoris. Like, all right. And doors that weren't really doors at all, but solid walls just pretending. This is some fucking. This I don't really. I'm all for going to Hogwarts, but I don't want furniture to like decide whether I could sit on it or not. You know what I'm saying? It was also very hard to remember where anything was. Yeah, because shit's fucking with you the whole time. Because it all seemed to move around a lot. The people in the portraits kept going to visit each other, and Harry was sure the coats of armor could walk. That's scary to me. The ghost didn't like like I get that Hogwarts is a magical fucking place, but like if she just like wrote this as a horror book, like if Stephen King wrote this, he could just have it exactly the same. It was always a nasty shock when one of them glided suddenly through a door you were trying to open. Nearly headless Schmuck was always happy to point new Gryffindors in the right direction. But Peeves the Poltergeist was worth 2 locked doors and a trick staircase if you met him when you were late for class. He would drop waste paper baskets on your head, pull rugs from under your feet, pelt you with bits of chalk, or sneak up behind you, invisible, grab your nose, like fuck, and screech, "Gotcha, conk!" Even worse than Peeves, if that was possible, was the caretaker, Argus Filch. Harry and Ron managed to get on the wrong side of him on their very first morning. Filch found them trying to force their way through a door that unluckily turned out to be the entrance to the out of bounds corridor on the 3rd floor. He wouldn't believe they were lost, was sure they were trying to break into it on purpose, and was threatening to lock them in the dungeons when they were rescued by Professor Quirrell, who was passing. Filch owned a cat called Mrs. Norris, a scrawny, dust-colored creature with bulging, lamp-like eyes, just like Filch's. She patrolled the corridors alone. See, it's true. Filch could get some pussy. Break a rule in front of her, put just one toe out of line, and she'd whisk off for Filch, who'd appear, wheezing, 2 seconds later. Filch knew the secret passageways of the school better than anyone, except perhaps the Weasley twins, and could pop up as suddenly as any of the ghosts. The students all hated him, and it was the dearest ambition of many to give Mrs. Norris a good kick. Yes, J.K. Rowling, let's promote kicking cats. You fucking bitch. I'm glad Dino's not here to like hear me say that. And then once you had managed to find them, there were the classes themselves. There was a lot more to magic, as Harry quickly found out, than waving your wand and saying a few funny words. Well, sort of. They had to study the night skies through their telescopes every Wednesday at midnight and learn the names of different stars and the movements of the planets. 3 times a week, they went out to the greenhouses behind the castle to study herbology with a dumpy little witch called Professor Sprout, where they learned how to take care of all the strange plants and fungi and found out what they were used for. Yeah, like tripping balls. Easily the most boring class was History of Magic, which was the only one taught by a ghost. Professor Binns had been very old indeed when he had fallen asleep in front of the staff room fire and got up next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him. Binns droned on, and while they scribbled down names and dates and got Emmerich the Evil and Auric the Oddball mixed up. Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher, was a tiny little wizard who had to stand on a pile of books to see over his desk. At the start of their first class, he took the roll call, and when he reached Harry's name, he gave an excited squeak and toppled out of sight. Professor McGonagall was again different. Harry had been quite right to think she wasn't a teacher to cross. Strict and clever, she gave them a talking to the moment they sat down in her first class. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she said. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Then she changed her desk into a pig and back again. They were all very impressed and couldn't wait to get started, but soon realized they weren't going to be changing the furniture and the animals for a long time. Why is that a thing? Like, I'm all for magic and shit, but like, why? On what planet do you ever need to turn your chair into like a goose? Whatever. After taking a lot of complicated notes, they were each given a match and started trying to turn it into a needle. By the end of the lesson, only Hermione Granger had made any difference to her match. Famine. Professor McGonagall showed the class how it had gone all silver and pointy and gave Hermione a rare smile. The class everyone had really been looking forward to was Defense Against the Dark Arts, but Quirrell's lessons turned out to be a bit of a joke. His classroom smelled strongly of garlic, which everyone said was to ward off a vampire he'd met in Romania, and was afraid he'd be coming back to get him one of these days. His turban, he told them, had been given to him by an African prince as a thank you for getting rid of a troublesome zombie, but they weren't sure they believed this story. For one thing, when Seamus Finnegan asked eagerly to hear how Quirrell had fought off the zombie, Quirrell went pink and started talking about the weather. For another, they had noticed that a funny smell hung around the turban, and the Weasley twins insisted that it was stuffed full of garlic as well, so that Quirrell was protected wherever he went. So what they're saying is, spoilers, Voldemort stinks. Got it. Harry was very relieved to find out that he wasn't miles behind everyone else. Lots of people had come from Muggle families and, like him, hadn't any idea they were witches and wizards. There was so much to learn that even people like Ron didn't have much of a head start. Friday was an important day for Harry and Ron. They finally managed to find their way down to the Great Hall for breakfast without getting lost once. What have we got today? Harry asked Ron as he poured sugar on his porridge. Double potions with the Slytherins, said Ron. Snape's head of Slytherin House. They say always favors them. We'll be able to see if it's true. Wish McGonagall favored us, said Harry. Professor McGonagall was head of Gryffindor House, but it hadn't stopped her from giving them a huge pile of homework the day before. Just then, the mail arrived. Harry had gotten used to this by now, but it had given him a bit of a shock on the first morning when about 100 owls had suddenly streamed into the great hall during breakfast, circling the tables until they saw their owners and dropping letters and packages onto their laps. And shit, they're shitting all over the food. Like, that's not, like, birds shit all the time. Look at New York City. Look at any, like, owls are just fucking, here's your mail and here's some shit. Hedwig hadn't brought Harry anything so far. She sometimes flew in to nibble his ear and have a bit of toast before going off to sleep in the owlery with the other school owls. This morning, however, she fluttered down between the marmalade and the sugar bowl and dropped a note onto Harry's plate. Harry tore it open at once, and it said in a very untidy scrawl, Dear Harry, I know you get Friday afternoons off, so would you like to come and have a cup of tea with me around 3? I want to hear all about your first week. Send us an answer back with Hedwig. Hagrid. Harry borrowed Ron's quill, scribbled, Yes, please, see you later, on the back of the note, and sent Hedwig off again. It was lucky that Harry had tea with Hagrid to look forward to, because the potions lesson turned out to be the worst thing that had happened to him so far. At the start of a term banquet, Harry had gotten the idea that Professor Snape disliked him. By the end of the first potions lesson, he knew he'd been wrong. Snape didn't dislike Harry. He hated him. Potions lessons took place down one of the dungeons. It was colder here than at the main castle, and would have been quite creepy enough without the pickled animals floating in glass jars all around the walls. It's a clear sign of a serial killer. Snape, like Flitwick, started the class by taking the roll call, and like Flitwick, he paused at Harry's name. Yes, he said softly. Harry Potter, our new celebrity. Draco Malfoy and his friends, Crabbe and Goyle, sniggered behind their hands. Snape finished calling the names and looked up at the class. His eyes were black like Hagrid's, but they had none of Hagrid's warmth. They were cold and empty and made you think of dark tunnels. You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making, he began. He spoke in barely more than a whisper, but they caught every word. Like Professor McGonagall, Snape had the gift of keeping a class silent without effort. As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering films, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, ensnaring the senses. I could teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, if you aren't as big of a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach. More silence followed this little speech. Harry and Ron exchanged looks and raised eyebrows. Harry and Hermione Granger was on the edge of her seat and looked desperate to start proving that she wasn't a dunderhead. Potter, said Snape suddenly, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Powdered root of what the fuck to an infusion of holy what? Harry glanced at Ron, who looked as stumped as he was. Hermione's hand shot into the air. I don't know, sir, said Harry. Snape's lips curled into a sneer. Fame clearly isn't everything. He ignored Hermione's hand. Let's try again, Potter. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bazaar? Hermione stretched her hand as high into the air as it would go without leaving her seat. But Harry didn't have the faintest idea what a bazaar was. He tried not to look at Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who were shaking with laughter. I don't know, sir. Thought you wouldn't open a book before coming, eh, Potter? Thank you, Jay. Harry forced himself to look straight into those cold eyes. He had looked through his books at the Dursleys, but did Snape expect him to remember everything in 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi? Snape was still ignoring Hermione's quivering hand. What is the difference, Potter, between Monkshood and Wolfsbane? At this, Hermione stood up, her hand stretching toward the dungeon ceiling. She either wants to know or she's sick hiling. I don't know, said Harry quietly. I think Hermione does, though. Why don't you try her? A few people laughed. Harry caught Seamus's eye, and Seamus winked. Snape, however, was not fucking pleased. Sit down, he snapped at Hermione. For your information, Potter, asphodel and wormwood make a sleeping potion so powerful it is known as the draught of living death. A bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat and will save you from most poisons. As for monkshood and wolfsbane, they are the same plant, which also goes by the name of aconite. Well, why aren't you all writing that down? There was a sudden rummaging for quills and parchment. Over the noise, Snape said, and a point will be taken from Gryffindor House for your cheek, Potter. Things did improve for the Gryffindors as the potions lessons continued. Snape put them all into pairs and set them to mixing up a simple potion to cure boils. He swept around his long black cloak, watching them weigh dried nettles and crush snake fangs, criticizing almost everyone except Malfoy, whom he seemed to like. He was just telling everyone to look at the perfect way Malfoy had stewed his horned slugs when clouds of acid green smoke and a loud hissing filled the dungeon. Neville had somehow managed to melt Seamus's cauldron into a twisted blob, and their potion was seeping across the stone floor, burning holes in people's shoes. Yeah, this is a safe fucking school. Within seconds, the whole class was standing on their stools while Neville, who had been drenched in the potion with the cauldron collapse, moaned in pain as angry red boils sprang all over his arms and legs. "Idiot boy!" snarled Snape, clearing the spilled potion away with one wave of his wand. "I suppose you out of the porcupine quills before taking the cauldron off the fire." Neville whimpered as boils started to pop up all over his nose. "No, buddy, that's just puberty. I'm sorry." "Take him to the hospital, Wang." Harry spat at Seamus. Then he rounded on Harry and Ron, who had been working next to Neville. "You, Potter, why didn't you tell him not to add the quills? Thought he'd make you look good if you got it wrong, did it? That's another point you've lost for Gryffindor." Damn. This was so unfair that Harry opened his mouth to argue, but Ron kicked him behind their cauldron. "Don't push it," he muttered. "I've heard Snape can turn very nasty." I think I'm still going through puberty, Kateri. As they climbed the steps out of the dungeon an hour later, Harry's mind was racing and his spirits were low. He'd lost 2 points for Gryffindor in his very first week. Why did Snape hate him so much? Find out in a couple books. "Cheer up," said Ron. "Snape's always taking points off Fred and George. Can I come meet Hagrid with you?" At 5 to 3, they left the castle and made their way across the grounds. Hagrid lived in a small wooden house on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. A crossbow and a pair of galoshes were outside the front door. When Harry knocked, they heard a frantic scrambling from inside and several booming barks. Then Hagrid's voice rang out saying, "Back, Fang, back!" Hagrid's big, hairy face appeared in the crack. "Hello," as he pulled the door open. "Hang on," he said. "Back, Fang." He let them in, struggling to keep a hold on the collar of an enormous black boarhound. "Thank you, Kateri." There was only one room inside. Hams and pheasants were hanging around the ceiling. A copper kettle was boiling on the open fire, and in the corner stood a massive bed with a patchwork quilt over it. "Make yourself at home," said Hagrid, letting go of Fang, who bounced straight at Ron and started licking his ears. It's a good goddamn thing Fang is not like the horny dog who just like wants to fucking hump everything. Imagine like a dog the size of Hagrid trying to hump your leg. You just break your fucking leg. Like Hagrid, Fang was clearly not as fierce as he looked. Yeah, because he's been fixed. "This is Ron," Harry told Hagrid, who was pouring boiling water into a large teapot and putting rock cakes onto a plate. "Another Weasley, eh?" said Hagrid, glancing at Ron's freckles. "Spent half me life chasing your twin brothers away from the forest." The rock cakes were shapeless lumps with raisins that almost broke their teeth. How is something shapeless? Whatever. But Harry and Ron pretended to be enjoying them as they told Hagrid all about their first lessons. Fang rested his head on Harry's knee and drooled all over his robes. Harry and Ron were delighted to hear Hagrid call Filch "that old git." "And as for that cat, Mrs. Norris, I'd like to introduce her to Fang sometime. Do you know, every time I go to the school, she follows me everywhere. Can't get rid of her. Filch puts her up to it." I find it hard to believe that Hagrid would dislike an animal. Even if it's Mrs. Norris, he would still be like, "Misunderstood cat, just worst owner. She'd be great if she was with me." Harry told Hagrid about Snape's lesson. Hagrid, like Ron, told Harry not to worry about it, that Snape liked hardly 80 of the students. "But he seemed to really hate me," Rubbish, said Hagrid. Why should he? Yet Harry couldn't help thinking that Hagrid didn't quite meet his eyes when he said that. How's your brother Charlie? Hagrid asked Ron. I liked him a lot. Great with animals. Harry wondered if Hagrid had changed the subject on purpose. Yep. While Ron told Hagrid all about Charlie's work with dragons, and I'm just imagining Hagrid is getting harder and harder as he's being explained that. Harry picked up a piece of paper that was lying on the table under the tea cozy. It was a cutting from the Daily Prophet. Gringotts break-in latest. Investigations continue into the break-in at Gringotts on 31 July, widely believed to be the work of dark wizards or witches unknown. Gringotts goblins today insisted that nothing had been taken. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied the same day. But we're not telling you what was in there, so keep your nose out of it. What's good for you, said a Gringotts spokesgoblin. Harry remembered Ron telling him on the train that someone had tried to rob Gringotts, but Ron hadn't mentioned the date. Hagrid, said Harry, that Gringotts break-in happened on my birthday. It might have been happening while we were there. There was no doubt about it. Hagrid definitely didn't meet Harry's eyes this time. He grunted and offered him another rock cake. Harry read that story again. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied earlier the same day. Hagrid had emptied Vault 713, if you could call it emptying, taking out that grubby little pack. Yeah, that's emptying it. Like, that's what that means. Had that been what the thieves were looking for? As Harry and Ron walked back to the castle for dinner, their pockets weighed down with rock cakes they'd been too polite to refuse. Harry thought that none of the lessons he'd had so far had given him a much to think about his tea with Hagrid. Had Hagrid collected that package just in time? Where was it now? And did Hagrid know something about Snape that he didn't want to tell Harry? Find out next. Chapter 9. The Midnight Duel. Harry had never believed he would meet a boy that he hated more than Dudley, but that was way before he met Draco Malfoy. Still, first-year Gryffindors only had potions with the Slytherins, so they didn't have to put up with Malfoy much. Or at least they didn't until they spotted a notice pinned up in the Gryffindor common room that made them all groan. Flying lessons would be starting on Thursday, and Gryffindor and Slytherin would be learning together. Typical, said Harry darkly. Just what I always wanted, to make a fool of myself on a broomstick in front of Malfoy. He'd been looking forward to learning to fly more than anything else. You don't know you'll be making a fool of yourself, said Ron reasonably. Anyway, I know Malfoy's always going on about how good he is at Quidditch, but I bet that's old talk. I don't know. We're going to find out if I can. Malfoy certainly... Let me see how many pages it is, just for the sake of it. Well, I'm a pretty fast reader, but so far this is... shit. Oh, shit. Maybe. Malfoy certainly did talk about flying a lot. He complained loudly about first years never getting on the house Quidditch teams and told long, boastful stories that always seemed to end with him narrowly escaping muggles and helicopters. He wasn't the only one, though. The way Seamus Finnegan told it, he'd spent most of his childhood zooming around the countryside on his broomstick. Even Ron would tell anyone who'd listen about the time he'd almost hit a hang glider on Charlie's old broom. Everyone from wizarding families talked about Quidditch constantly. Ron already had a big argument with Dean Thomas, who shared their dormitory, about soccer. Ron couldn't see what was exciting about a game with only one ball where no one was allowed to fly. Harry had caught Ron prodding Dean's poster, a West Ham soccer team trying to make the players move. Neville had never been on a broomstick in his life. because his grandmother had never let him near one. No, but she'll let her brother, maybe, throw him out a goddamn window. Privately, Harry felt she had good reason because Neville managed to have an extraordinary number of accidents, even with both feet on the ground. Might want to get some Depends for that, Neville. Yes, true, Kateri. Dean Thomas is one of the few black people at Hogwarts. They really didn't give him a whole lot, unfortunately. Hermione Granger was almost as nervous about flying as Neville was. This was something you couldn't learn by heart out of a book. Not that she hadn't tried. At breakfast on Thursday, she bored them all stupid with flying tips she'd gotten out of a library book called Quidditch Through the Ages. Neville was hanging on to her every word, desperate for anything that might help him hang on to his broomstick later. But everybody else was very pleased when Hermione's lecture was interrupted by the arrival of the mail. Harry hadn't had a single letter. Sorry. Occasionally, my eyes get kind of gunky. Harry hadn't had a single letter since Hagrid's note, something that Malfoy had been quick to notice, of course. Malfoy's eagle owl was always bringing him packages of sweets from home, which he opened gloatingly at the Slytherin table. A barn owl brought Neville a small package from his grandmother. He opened it excitedly and showed them a glass ball the size of a large marble, which seemed to be full of white smoke. Fun fact, in the movie, when he gets the Rememberall, he says, "Oh, I forgot. I don't. The problem is I don't know what the fuck I forgot." If you watch it, he's not wearing his robe. He's just wearing the uniform without his his robe. There you go. It's a Rememberall, he explained. Gran knows I forget things. This tells you if there's something you've forgotten to do. Look, you hold it tight like this and it turns red. Oh, his face fell because the Rememberall had suddenly glowed scarlet. It means you've forgotten something. Neville was trying to remember what he'd forgotten when Draco Malfoy, who was passing the Gryffindor table, snatched the Rememberall out of his hand. Yeah, I'm adjusting to the glasses, but it's still... Like, I'm wearing them all the time. I don't have to switch to the old pair, but it's still... I haven't worn the sunglasses as much. Harry and Ron jumped to their feet. They were half hoping for a reason to fight Malfoy. Professor McGonagall, who could spot trouble quicker than any teacher in the school, was there in a flash. What's going on? Malfoy's got my Rememberall, Professor. Scowling, Malfoy quickly dropped the Rememberall back on the table. Just looking, he said, as he sloped away with Crabbe and Goyle behind him. At 3:30 that afternoon, Harry, Ron, and the other Gryffindors hurried down the front steps on the grounds for their first flying lesson. It was a clear, breezy day, and the grass rippled under their feet as they marched down the sloping lawns toward a smooth, flat lawn on the opposite side of the grounds to the forbidden forest whose trees were swaying darkly in the distance. That was a long run-on fucking sentence. The Slytherins were already there, and so were 20 broomsticks lying in neat lines on the ground. Harry had heard friend George Weasley complain about the school brooms, saying that some of them started to vibrate if you flew too high, or always flew slightly to the left. There's a testicle joke somewhere in there, but I'm not touching it. Their teacher, Madame Hooch, arrived. She had short gray hair and yellow eyes like a hawk. Well, what are you all waiting for? She barked. Everyone stand by a broomstick. Come on, hurry up. Harry glanced down at his broom. It was old, and some of the twigs stuck out in odd angles. Agreed, Steph. Stick out your right hand over your broom, called Madame Hooch at the front, and say, up! Up! Everyone shouted. Harry's broom jumped into his hand at once, but it was one of the few that did. Hermione Granger's had simply rolled over on the ground. It was playing dead, and Neville's hadn't moved at all. It was dead. Perhaps brooms, like horses, could tell when you were afraid, thought Harry. There was a quaver in Neville's voice that said only too clearly that he wanted to keep his feet on the ground. Madam Hooch then showed them how to mount their brooms without sliding off the end, and walked up and down the rows, correcting their grips. Harry and Ron were delighted when she told Malfoy he'd been doing it wrong for years. Now, when I blow my whistle, you kick off from the ground hard, said Madam Hooch. Excuse me. I should drink less carbon when I do this. Keep your brooms steady, rise a few feet, then come straight back down by leaning forward slightly. On my whistle, 3, 2. But Neville, nervous and jumpy and frightened of being left on the ground, pushed off hard before the whistle had touched Madam Hooch's lips. Come back, boy, she shouted, but Neville was rising straight up like a cork shot out of a bottle. 12 feet, 20 feet. Harry saw his scared white face look down at the ground falling away, saw him gasp, slip sideways off the broom, and wham! A thud and a nasty crack, and Neville lay face down on the grass in a heap. So he survived being dropped out the window, but he couldn't. Logic in this fucking book sometimes. His broomstick was still rising higher and higher. I'm such a child. And started to drift lazily toward the forbidden forest and out of sight. Madam Hooch was bending over Neville, her face as white as his. Broken wrist, Harry heard her mutter. Come on, boy. It's all right. Up you get. She turned to the rest of the class. None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are, or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you could say Quidditch. Come on, dear. Neville, his face tear-streaked, clutching his wrist, hobbled off with Madam Hooch, who had had her arm around him. No sooner were they out of earshot when Malfoy burst into laughter. Did you see his face, the great lump? The other Slytherins joined in. Shut up, Malfoy, snapped Parvati Patel. Ooh, sticking up for Longbottom, said Pansy Parkinson, a hard-faced Slytherin girl. Never thought you'd like fat little crybabies, Parvati. Look, said Malfoy, darting forward and snatching something out of the grass. It's that stupid thing Longbottom's grandsent him. The Rememberall glittered in the sun as he held it up. Give that here, Malfoy, said Harry quietly. Everyone stopped talking to watch. Fight, fight, fight. Malfoy smiled nastily. I think I'll leave it somewhere for Longbottom to find. How about up a tree? Give it here, Harry yelled. But Malfoy had leaped onto his broom and taken off. He hadn't been lying. He could fly well. Hovering level with the topmost branches of an oak, he called, Come and get it, Potter. Harry grabbed his broom. No, shouted Hermione Granger. Madam Hooch told us not to move. You'll get us all into trouble. Harry ignored her. Yeah, that's the problem. Harry ignored Hermione. God damn it. Every fucking book has a problem because he just ignored Hermione. Blood was pounding in his ears. He mounted the broom and kicked hard against the ground, and up he soared. Air rushed through his hair, and his robes whipped out behind him. And in a rush of fierce joy, he realized he'd found something he could do without being taught. This was easy. This was wonderful. He pulled his broomstick up a little to take it even higher, and heard screams and gasps of girls back on the ground, and admiring whoop from Ron. All the other boys didn't give a shit. It was just Ron and a bunch of girls. He turned his broomstick sharply to face Malfoy in midair. Malfoy looked stunned. Give it here, Harry called, or I'll knock you off that broom. Oh yeah, said Malfoy, trying to sneer but looking worried. It could be the fact that Jen is listening to it on Bluetooth, correct? That could be just something wrong with the speakers. Harry knew somehow what to do. He leaned forward and grasped the broom tightly in both hands. Giggity! And it shot toward Malfoy like a javelin. Malfoy only just got out of the way in time. Harry made a sharp about-face and held the broom steady. A few people below were clapping. No Crab and Goyle up here to save your neck, Malfoy, Harry called. The same thought seemed to have struck Malfoy. Catch it if you can, then, he shouted, and he threw the glass ball high into the air and streaked back toward the ground. Harry saw, as though in slow motion, his first flying lesson was brought to you by Zack Snyder. The ball rise up in the air and then started to fall. He leaned forward and pointed his broom handle down. Next second, he was gathering speed in a steep dive, racing the ball. Wind whistled in his ears, mingled with the screams of people watching. He stretched out his hand. A foot from the ground, he caught it, just in time to pull his broom straight, and he toppled gently onto the grass with the remember all clutched safely in his fist. Harry Potter! His heart sank faster than he just dived. Professor McGonagall was running toward them. He got to his feet trembling. Never in all my time at Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall was almost speechless with shock, and her glasses flashed furiously. How dare you? Might have broken your neck. It wasn't his fault, Professor. Be quiet. But Malfoy, that's enough, Mr. Weasley. Potter, follow me now. Harry caught sight of Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle's triumphant faces as he left. And he probably should have just, as he walked, just done this shit. Walking numbly in Professor McGonagall's wake as she strode toward the castle. He was going to be expelled. He just knew it. Spoiler, there's fucking 7 books. He wasn't expelled. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but there seemed to be something wrong with his voice. Professor McGonagall was sweeping along without even looking at him. He had to jog to keep up. Now he'd done it. He hadn't even lasted 2 goddamn weeks. He'd be packing his bags in 10 minutes. What would the Dursleys say when he turned up on the doorstep? Ah, shit. Up the front steps, up the marble staircase inside, and still Professor McGonagall didn't say a word to him. She wrenched open doors and marched along corridors with Harry trotting miserably behind her. Maybe she was taking him to Dumbledore. He thought of Hagrid, expelled but allowed to stay on as gamekeeper. Perhaps he could be Hagrid's assistant. His stomach twisted as he imagined it, watching Ron and the others becoming wizards while he stumped around the grounds carrying Hagrid's bag. Professor McGonagall stopped outside a classroom. She opened the door and poked her head inside. Excuse me, Professor Flitwick, could I borrow wood for a moment? Wood, thought Harry, bewildered. Was wood a cane she was going to use on him? I love it. Harry thought he was going to be beat, like have the fuck beat out of him by McGonagall. By the way, the actor who plays Oliver Wood is in itself a pun. His name is like Sean Biggerstaff. No joke. But Wood turned out to be a person, a burly 5th-year boy who came out of Flitwick's class looking confused. Follow me, you two, said Professor McGonagall, and they marched up on the corridor, Wood looking curiously at Harry. In here, Professor McGonagall pointed them into a classroom that was empty except for Peeves, who was busy writing rude words on the blackboard. Out, Peeves! She barked. Peeves threw the chalk into a bin, which clanged loudly, and he swooped out cursing. Oh, fuck you, you stupid bitch. Well, that's what I imagine. Professor McGonagall slammed the door behind him and turned to face the other boys. Potter, this is Oliver Wood. Wood, I've found you a secret. Wood's expression changed from puzzlement to delight. Hi, Kara. Thanks for joining us. Are you serious, Professor? Absolutely, said Professor McGonagall crisply. The boy's a natural. I've never seen anything like it. Was that your first time on a broomstick, Potter? Harry nodded silently. He didn't have a clue what was going on, but he didn't seem to be expelled, and some of the feelings started coming back to his legs. He caught the thing in his hand at about a 50-foot dive, Professor McGonagall told Wood. Didn't even scratch himself. Charlie Weasley couldn't have done it. Wood was now looking as though all his dreams had come true at once. Ever seen a game of Quidditch, Potter? He asked excitedly. Wood's captain of the Gryffindor team, Professor McGonagall explained. He's just the build for a seeker, too, said Wood, now walking around Harry and staring at him. Light, speedy. We'll have to get him a decent broom, Professor. A Nimbus 2000 or a Clean Sweep 7, I'd say. I shall speak to Professor Dumbledore and see if we can't bend the first-year rule. Heaven knows we need a better team than last year. Flattened in that last match by Slytherin. I couldn't look Severus Snape in the face for weeks. Professor McGonagall peered sternly over her glasses at Harry. I want to hear you're training hard, Potter, or I may change my mind about punishing you. Then she suddenly smiled. Your father would have been proud, she said. He was an excellent Quidditch player himself. You're joking! It was dinner time. Harry had just finished telling Ron what had happened when he left the grounds with Professor McGonagall. Ron had a piece of steak and kidney pie halfway to his mouth, but he'd forgotten all about it. Seeker, he said, but first years never. You must be the youngest house player in about a century, said Harry, shoveling pie into his mouth. Yeah, you get that pie in your mouth. He felt particularly hungry after the excitement of the afternoon. Wood told me. Ron was so amazed, so impressed, he just sat and gaped at Harry. I start training next week, said Harry. Only don't tell anyone. Wood wants to keep it a secret. Friend George now came into the hall, spotted Harry, and hurried over. Well done, said George in a low voice. Wood told us we're on the teams too. Beat us. I tell you, we're going to win that Quidditch Cup for sure this year, said Fred. We haven't won since Charlie left, but this year's team is going to be brilliant. You must be good, Harry. Wood was almost skipping when he told us. Anyway, we've got to go. Lee Jordan reckons he's found a new secret passageway out of the school. That is that one behind the statue of Gregory the Smarmy that we found our first week. See ya. See ya. See ya. Friend George had hardly disappeared when someone Malfoy, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle. Having a lost meal, Potter? When are you getting the train back to the Muggles? You're a lot braver now that you're back on the ground. You've got your little friends with you, said Harry coolly. There was, of course, nothing at all little about Crabbe and Goyle. I don't know about that. I'm willing to bet there's something little about Crabbe and Goyle. But as the high table was full of teachers, neither of them could do more than crack their knuckles and scowl. I'd take you on any time on my own, said Malfoy. Tonight, if you want. Wizard's duel. Wands only. No contact. What's the matter? Never heard of a wizard's duel before, I suppose. Of course he has, said Ron, wheeling around. I'm his second. Who's yours? Malfoy looked at Crabbe and Goyle, sizing them up. Crabbe, he said. Midnight's all right? We'll meet you in the trophy room. That's always unlocked. Why do you know that? What are you doing in the trophy room, Malfoy? When Malfoy had gone, Ron and Harry looked at each other. Okay, what is a wizard's duel? Said Harry. And what the fuck do you mean you're my second? Well, a second's there to take over if you die, said Ron casually, getting started at last on his cold pie. Catching the look on Harry's face, he added quickly, but people only die in proper duels, with real wizards. The most you and Malfoy will be able to do is send sparks at each other. Neither of you knows enough magic to do any real damage. I bet he expected you to refuse, anyway. And what if I wave my wand and nothing happens? Throw it away and punch him on the nose, Ron suggested. Yeah, because violence solves everything. Excuse me, they both looked up. It was Hermione Granger. Can't a person eat in peace in this place? Oh, fuck you, Ron. You're in a castle with, food magically appearing in front of you. Whiny little bitch. Hermione ignored him and spoke to Harry. I couldn't help overhearing what you and Malfoy was saying. Bet you could, Ron muttered. And you mustn't go wandering around the school at night. Think of the points you'll lose, Gryffindor, if you're caught. And you're bound to be. It's really very selfish of you. And it's really none of your business, said Harry. Goodbye, said Ron. All the same, it wasn't what you'd call the perfect end to the day. Harry thought as he lay awake much later listening to Dean and Seamus falling asleep. Neville wasn't back from the hospital wing. Ron had spent all evening giving him advice such as, if he tries to curse you, you better just dodge it, because I can't remember how to block them. Wow, what a useless fucking wizard. There was a very good chance they were going to get caught by Filch or Mrs. Norris, and Harry felt he was pushing his luck, breaking another school rule today. On the other hand, Malfoy's sneering face kept looming up out of the darkness. This was his big chance to beat Malfoy face to face. He could miss it. I mean, you did. You caught the remember all. You proved him wrong. You did something. God damn it, Harry, you prideful fuck. Instead of eating your fucking Yorkshire pudding, you should swallow that thing you fucking call pride. 11:30, Ron muttered at last. We better go. They pulled on their bathrobes, picked up their wands, and crept across the tower room, down the spiral staircase, and into the Gryffindor common room. A few embers were still glowing in the fireplace, turning all the armchairs into hunched black shadows. They had almost reached the portrait hall when a voice spoke from the chair nearest them. I can't believe you're going to do this, Harry. Believe it. It's that should be the title of this fucking book. I can't believe you're going to fucking do this, Harry. A lamp flickered on. It was Hermione Granger wearing a pink bathrobe and a frown. You, said Ron furiously, go back to bed. I almost told your brother, Hermione snapped. Percy, he's a prefect. Well, yeah, no shit, because no one fucking doesn't know that Percy's a goddamn prefect. He fucking told everybody. He put a stop to this. Harry couldn't believe anyone would be so infuriating. Come on, he said to Ron. He pushed open the portrait of the fat lady and climbed through the hole. Hermione wasn't going to give up that easily. She followed Ron through the portrait hole, hissing at them like an angry goose. Don't you care about Gryffindor? Do you only care about yourselves? I don't want Slytherin to win the House Cup, and you'll lose all the points I got from Professor McGonagall for knowing about switching spells. Go away. All right, but I warned you. You just remember what I said when you're on the train home tomorrow. Yes, so? But what they were, they didn't find out. Hermione had turned to the portrait of the fat lady to get back inside and found herself facing an empty painting. Fat lady had fucked off on it for a nighttime visit, and Hermione was locked out of Gryffindor Tower. Now what am I going to do? She asked shrilly. That's your problem, said Ron. We've got to go. We're going to be late. They hadn't even reached the end of the corridor when Hermione caught up with them. I'm coming with you, she said. You are not. Do you think I'm going to stand out there and wait for Filch to catch me? If he finds all three of us, I'll tell him the truth, that I was trying to stop you, and you can back me up. You've got some nerve, said Ron loudly. Shut up, both of you, said Harry. I heard something. It was a sort of snuffling. Mrs. Norris, breathed Ron, squinting through the dark. It wasn't Mrs. Norris. It was Neville. He was curled up on the floor, fast asleep, but jerked suddenly awake as they crept near. Thank goodness you found me. I've been out here for hours. I couldn't remember the new password to get into bed. Keep your voice down, Neville. The password's pig snout, but it won't help you now. The fat lady's gone off somewhere. How's your arm? Said Harry. Fine, said Neville. I'm just imagining David Schwimmer from Friends playing Neville. Fine, said Neville, showing them. Madam Pomfrey mended in about a minute. Well, then where the fuck have you been? You could have just gone back to class. Good. Well, look, Neville, we've got to be somewhere. We'll see you later. Don't leave me, said Neville, scrambling to his feet. I don't want to stay there alone. The bloody Baron's been passed twice already. Yeah, with all the silver semen on his robe. Ron looked at his watch and glared furiously at Neville and Hermione. If either of you get us caught, well, I'll never rest until I've learned that curse of the bogies Quirrell told us about and used it on you. Hermione opened her mouth, perhaps to tell Ron exactly how to use the curse of the bogies, but Harry hissed at her to be quiet and beckoned them all forward. They flitted along corridors striped with bars of moonlight from the high windows. At every turn, Harry expected to run into Filch or Mrs. Norris, but they were lucky. They sped up a staircase to the third floor and tiptoed toward the trophy room. Malfoy and Crabbe weren't there yet. The crystal trophy cases glimmered where the moonlight caught them. Cups, shields, plates, and statues winked silver and gold in the darkness. They edged along the walls, keeping their eyes on the door at either side of the room. Harry took out his wand in case Malfoy leaped in and started at once. The minutes crept by. He's late. Maybe he's chickened out, Ron whispered. Then a noise in the next room made them jump. Harry had only just raised his wand when he heard someone speak, and it wasn't Malfoy. Sniff around, my sweet. They might be lurking in a corner. It was Filch speaking to Mrs. Norris. Horror-struck, Harry waved madly at the other three to follow him as quickly as possible. They fucked off silently toward the door, away from Filch's voice. Neville's robes had barely whipped around the corner when they heard Filch enter the trophy room. They're in here somewhere, they heard muttering, probably hiding. This way, Harry. uh, This way, Harry mouthed, not loud like I just did it, to the others, and petrified, they began to creep down a long gallery of suits of armor. They could hear Filch getting nearer. Neville suddenly let out a frightened squeak and broke into a run. He tripped, grabbed Ron around the waist, and the pair of them toppled right into a suit of armor. The clanging and crashing were enough to wake up the whole castle. Run! Harry yelled, which you didn't need to do, and the four of them sprinted down the gallery, not looking back to see whether Filch was following. They sprung around the doorpost and galloped down one corridor, then another. Harry in the lead, without any idea where they were or where they were going. They ripped through a tapestry and found themselves in a hidden passageway, hurtled along it, and came out near their charms classroom, which they knew was miles from the trophy room. I think we've lost him, Harry panted, leaning against the cold wall and wiping his forehead. Neville was bent double, wheezing and spluttering. I told you, Hermione gasped, clutching the stitch in her chest. I told you. We've got to get back to Gryffindor Tower, said Ron, quickly as possible. Malfoy tricked you, Hermione said to Harry. You realize that, don't you? He was never going to meet you. Filch knew someone was going to be in that trophy room. Malfoy must have tipped him off. Harry thought she was probably right, but he wasn't going to tell her that. Let's go. It wasn't going to be that simple. They hadn't gone more than a dozen paces when a doorknob rattled and something came shooting out of a classroom in front of them. It was Peeves. He caught sight of them and gave a squeal of delight. Shut up, Peeves, please. You'll get us thrown out. Peeves cackled. Wandering around at midnight. Ickle festies. Naughty, naughty, you'll get caughty. Not if you don't give us away, Peeves, please. Should I tell Filch? I should, said Peeves in a saintly voice, but his eyes glittered wickedly. It's for your own good, you know. Get out of the way, snapped Ron, taking a swipe at Peeves. This was a big mistake. Students out of bed, Peeves bellowed. Students out of bed down the charms corridor. Ducking under Peeves, they ran for their lives. Right to the end of the corridor where they slammed into a door, and it was locked. This is it, Ron moaned as they pushed helplessly at the door. We're done for. This is the end. Oh, the humanity. You whiny fuck. They could hear footsteps. Filch running as fast as he could towards Peeves' shouts. Oh, move over, snarled Hermione. She grabbed Harry's wand. Hello, tapped the lock, and whispered, Aloha Mora. The lock clicked and the door swung open. They piled through it, shut it quickly, and pressed their ears against it, listening. Which way did they go, Peeves? Filch was saying. Quick, tell me. Say, please. Don't mess with me, Peeves. Now, where did they go? Shan't say nothing if you don't say please, said Peeves in an annoying sing-song voice. All right, please. Nothing! Told you I wouldn't say nothing if you didn't say please. And they heard the sound of Peeves fucking whooshing away and Filch cursing in rage. He thinks his door was locked, Harry whispered. I think we'll be okay. Get off, Neville! But Neville had been tugging on the sleeve of Harry's bathrobe for the last minute. What? Harry turned around and saw quite clearly what? For a moment, he was sure he'd walked into a nightmare. This was too much on top of everything that had happened so far. They weren't in a room, as he had supposed. They were in a corridor. The forbidden corridor on the 3rd floor. And now they knew why it was forbidden. Time out. If it's that forbidden, and Dumbledore is saying it's forbidden, Aloha Mora shouldn't get your ass in there. He should have tried a little easier. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog. A dog that filled the whole space between ceiling and floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling mad eyes, 3 noses twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes from yellowish fangs. If it's got 3 heads, does it also have 3 heads? It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at them, and Harry knew that the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had taken it by surprise. God, can you imagine getting humped by Fluffy? Holy shit. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistaking what those thunderous growls meant. Harry groped for the doorknob. Between Filch and death, he'd take Filch. They fell backward. Harry slammed the door shut, and they ran. They almost flew back down the corridor. Filch must have fucked off to look for them somewhere else, because they didn't see him anywhere. But they hardly cared. All they wanted to do was to put as much space as possible between them and that monster. They didn't stop running until they reached the portrait of the fat lady on the 7th floor. Where on earth have you all been? She asked, looking at their bathrobes hanging off their shoulders and their flushed, sweaty faces. Never mind that. Pig snout, panted Harry, and the portrait hall swung forward. They scrambled into the common room and collapsed, trembling into armchairs. It was a while before any of them said anything. Neville, indeed, looked as though he'd never speak again. What do you think they're doing, keeping a thing like that locked up in a school? Said Ron, finally. If any dog needs exercise, that one does. Hermione had got both her breath and her bad temper back again. You don't use your eyes, any of you, do you? She snapped. Did you see what was standing on? The floor? Harry suggested. I wasn't looking at its feet. I was too busy with its heads. Which ones? No, not the floor. It was standing on a trap door. It's obviously guarding something. She stood up, glaring at them. I hope you're pleased with yourselves. We could have all been killed, or worse, expelled. Why is that better? Why is getting killed better than being expelled? Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to bed. Ron stared after her, his mouth open. Oh, you'll be doing that a lot during puberty, buddy. No, we don't mind, he said. You'd think we'd dragged her along, wouldn't you? But Hermione, I mean, just for a second, it's not like she is from a witching or wizarding family. Like there's shame in being expelled. Her parents are fucking dentists. They don't give a fuck. They're like, all right, well, you can go back to regular fucking school. But Hermione had given Harry something else to think about as he climbed back into bed. The dog was guarding something. What had Hagrid said? Gringotts was the safest place in the world for something you wanted to hide. Except perhaps Hogwarts. It looked as though Harry had found out where the grubby little package from Vault 713 was. End of chapter 9. We're making good progress, guys. So we got about 20 minutes left. I don't think I can finish. Yeah, I don't think I could. I don't want to rush like I did before. So we can take a break. We can stop now, or I can keep going and then stop about maybe 10 minutes before, so that. Oh yeah, so we might as well just stop now. I don't really want to rush through it, and we might as well do some announcements now. So let's unlock it. But thanks for tolerating that, guys. Let me switch to that. Anyone? Bueller? Thank you, Kateri. And Kara, is it Kara or Kara? Just want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. Kara, got it. Go on, just make sure.
Do you want me to stop the audio, Rico?
You can stop the audio. Well, no, I don't want you to respond either way, Kara. I want you to respond how your name is pronounced. I don't respond to anybody who says my name is Rico. So
he's answered when I've called him Dick a few times, but that's a whole different.
well, you know, that's one thing. Thank you, Jay. CJ, what'd you think?
Not bad. I was in and out because I was doing things, getting ready for the show, and just some stuff around the house I wanted to do before I start the show. You know.
Okay.
But yeah, it wasn't bad for the parts I heard.
Good.
Yeah. I've got the whole hour and 43 minutes of it recorded, so.
Good.
Yeah.
And for those who want to get the first couple episodes, they're on our Get Vocal. You can find.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop the video broadcast. We'll hang out here if you want, but I'm gonna stop the video broadcast unless you want to